Okay, let's picture this. Saffron, the world's most precious spice, those incredible threads, so much history, that amazing color, flavor, aroma,
Hmm.
plus all those medicinal uses people talk about.
Absolutely iconic
But
stuff.
actually getting it,
Hmm.
traditionally, wow, it's an uphill battle, right? You're completely reliant on specific climates. You're hoping the weather plays ball, wrestling with soil, water, pests, diseases. So much is just out of your hands.
Exactly. And that's precisely why indoor farming, controlled environment agriculture, is such a potential game changer for saffron. You take it indoors, you sidestep so many of those risks,
Right.
you can control the environment, maybe even get year-round production, which is something traditional farming just struggles with.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But even with all that high-tech control indoors, success still comes down to something kind of basic, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The saffron corm.
The absolute foundation.
Yeah, the plant's starting point, its energy pack, its whole blueprint. So this deep dive is for you. We've gone through a pile of research notes, articles, really trying to figure out how the characteristics of that little underground bulb, well, corm, technically,
Mhm.
how that dictates everything that happens above ground in an indoor setup. Our mission here is to unpack the evidence, show you what really matters when you're picking those corms for top yield and quality indoors.
It really is the crucial first step. You can have the fanciest lights, the best nutrient mix, but if you start with a poor corm, well, you're already behind.
Okay, so let's dig into why this little thing is so vital.
Well, like you said, saffron's incredibly valuable, and this move towards indoor soilless methods, hydroponics, aeroponics, that kind of thing, it's happening because growers want that control to get away from the unpredictability.
And the corm is dead center.
Mhm.
What exactly is it we're talking about here?
So it's technically a modified underground stem. Think of it like a storage locker, but for a plant. It's packed with carbs, nutrients, basically all the energy reserves the plant stored up from the last growing season.
And it's extra important because saffron, it doesn't reproduce by seed, does it? It's sterile triploid, I think is the term.
That's exactly right. It only propagates vegetatively through making copies of itself, these daughter corms. So the corm you plant is the only source of energy to get things started.
To push out leaves, flowers.
Initiate leaf growth, yeah, power the whole flowering process, and really importantly, produce the next generation of corms. Those daughter corms are your future stock. In these intensive indoor systems where you want fast turnaround, that initial stored energy, it's absolutely critical.
Got it. Okay, so it's the powerhouse. Now, the sources we looked at talk a lot about corm size and weight. Are those basically the same thing, or is there a difference we need to understand?
They're definitely related, but yeah, there's a key distinction. Size is usually at the physical dimensions. You measure the diameter, maybe group them like less than 2.5 centimeters versus more than 2.5 centimeters.
Or circumference? I saw things like 910 centimeters, 10 plus centimeter grace.
Exactly. That's common for commercial grading. It's something you can easily measure with calipers or sorting machines.
Okay, and weight.
Weight is just the actual mass, how much it weighs on a scale. It's a direct measure of the total stored biomass, the energy reserves inside.
So a bigger corm usually weighs more, but it's not always perfectly aligned.
Right. And this is where it gets interesting. The research often points to corms that feel heavy for their size as being particularly good.
Density makes sense.
Precisely. That dense feel suggests it's packed tighter with stored energy. Maybe it's better hydrated, too. We saw one calculation suggesting a healthy density might be around, 1.18 grams per cubic centimeter. Plausible, anyway.
So size is easy to sort by, but weight might be a truer measure of the actual fuel inside.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. Weight is often more directly linked to the potential energy for growth and flowering.
And that stored fuel, that's what drives everything, especially right at the start, before the leaves really get going with photosynthesis.
It powers the entire initial phase, and the impact is huge, starting with when the flowers emerge and, crucially, how many flowers you actually get. This link between larger, heavier corms and earlier, more abundant flowering is one of the most consistent findings across all the research.
Okay, so what kind of difference are we talking about? Do the studies quantify that?
Oh, absolutely. There was one study from Pakistan that was really stark. Under their specific field conditions, only the corms weighing between 8 and 11 grams actually produced any flowers.
Really? So anything smaller
Mm,
just didn't flower at all?
correct. Below 8 grams, in that study, they got 0 flowers. It just highlights how energy-intensive flowering is. If a corm is too small, its priority is just survival, not making flowers.
Wow. So there's like a minimum weight you absolutely need.
Seems that way, yes. There's a definite threshold. And another study, this one was actually indoors in Argentina. They compared different size grades. They called them S4 and S3, with S4 being the larger ones.
Okay.
And the larger S4 corms produce 3 times more flowers per corm than the smaller S3 ones.
3 times, just based on the starting corm.
Yep. Think about that impact on potential yield. And there's other data too, like from Poggi and colleagues, showing maybe just over 1 flower from a 10-gram corm, but jumping up to over 3 flowers from a 20-gram corm.
That's a massive difference in harvest potential right from the get-go.
It really is. The general consensus from the sources is pretty clear. Corms below a certain weight, whether it's 8 grams, or some studies mention 4 grams, maybe even 2 grams, in some contexts, they're just unlikely to flower. They lack the starting capital.
And logically, more flowers means more saffron yield, right? More threads.
Absolutely. It translates directly. More flowers from those bigger, heavier corms mean a higher yield of stigmas, both fresh weight and dry weight. That Pakistan study, again, they give specific numbers, like 0.0075 grams of dry stigma per flower from those 8-11-gram corms. Another multi-year field study also showed larger corms over 2.5 centimeter diameter gave higher yields, especially in the first few years.
Okay, so quantity is clear. But this is where I think it gets really exciting for indoor growers who are often aiming for that super premium product. What about the actual quality of the saffron? Does the corm size affect the chemistry?
This is a fantastic point, and yes, there's compelling evidence. The Omid Baigi study is key here. They specifically compared saffron grown from 13-gram corms versus 15-gram corms.
It's just a 2-gram difference.
Right. Seems small, but the results were remarkable. They found the saffron from the slightly heavier 15-gram corms was superior in quality.
How do they measure that quality?
They did chemical analysis measuring the key compounds, crocin, which gives the color, picrocrocin for bitterness, and saffronol for the aroma. And the differences were quantifiable, statistically significant.
Like what?
For coloring power, the saffron from 15-gram corms had a higher value, 1.310 versus 1.261 from the 13-gram ones. And they saw similar improvements for the bitter and aroma compounds, too.
So it wasn't just more stigmas. The stigmas themselves had more of the good stuff that defines quality saffron.
Exactly. It suggests something deeper is happening physiologically. Those extra reserves in the heavier corms allow the plant to synthesize more of those complex, valuable molecules. Now, we should mention,
Yes.
one source we saw did make a very general statement, basically saying corm size has no effect on saffron quality.
Okay, a conflicting view.
Right. But when you put that broad statement up against the specific quantitative chemical data from the Omid Baigi study, the actual measurements of crocin, picrocrocin, saffronol, evidence, the hard numbers really point towards heavier corms producing chemically superior saffron. I tend to trust the specific analysis there.
That makes sense. Data trumps general claims. That's a really crucial takeaway for anyone serious about top-quality indoor saffron.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, what about the next cycle? Saffron relies on producing those daughter corms, right?
Absolutely essential. That's your propagation, the key to long-term sustainability for your operation. And guess what? The trend continues. Larger, heavier mother corms are much, much better at producing more daughter corms, and better daughter corms too.
How much better are we talking? Is it a minor difference or?
Pretty significant, actually. That Pakistan study again provided clear data. Their 8-11-gram mother corms produced, on average, over 6 daughter corms each.
In the smaller ones. The small ones, less than 4 grams, they produced almost none. The average was just 0.1 daughter corm per plant, barely anything. Other sources echo this bigger mother corms lead to more daughter corms, and crucially, daughter corms that are themselves a good size and wait for replanting.
So investing in a good quality corm initially kind of pays dividends by helping you create your own planting stock for the future.
Precisely. It cuts down your need to constantly buy new corms, which can be a major expense. The mother corm has more energy reserves, so it can afford to invest more in developing that next generation.
Makes sense. And what about the vegetative growth itself? The leaves, the overall plant size?
Also directly linked back to those initial reserves, larger corms fuel more vigorous leaf growth, more overall biomass. The Pakistan study, again, measured taller plants with more leaves per plant coming from their larger corm category.
And you mentioned earlier something about this interacting with planting depth. That seems really relevant for indoor systems using substrates.
Yes, this was a really practical finding from one study. They looked at corm weight and planting depth and found this fascinating interaction. For the largest corms, they tested 15.1 to 20 grams. They actually got better growth and more biomass when planted deeper at 20 centimeters.
Deeper for the biggest ones, okay.
For the intermediate-sized corms, the 10.1 to 15-gram ones, they did better when planted shallower, at 10 centimeters.
Huh. So the corm's starting energy level affects how well it can cope with being planted deeper.
Exactly. Pushing a shoot up through 20 centimeters of soil or substrate takes more energy than pushing through 10 centimeters. A big, heavy corm has the reserves to make that initial push and might then benefit from being deeper, maybe more stability, moisture retention, whatever.
Whereas a smaller one might struggle.
Right. A smaller corm might burn too much energy just trying to emerge from deep planting. Planting it shallower means emergence is easier, and it can get its leaves out and start photosynthesizing faster. The key takeaway is you can't just pick one planting depth and assume it's optimal for all your corms if they vary in size and weight.
Okay, that pulls together a lot of the core findings. So
Yeah.
let's get practical. For someone setting up an indoor saffron grow or really looking to optimize what they're already doing, what are the absolute must-dos when it comes to selecting corms based on all this evidence?
All right, based on everything we've looked at, corm selection is really, really important. Job number one. For reliable flowering, you absolutely need to prioritize corms weighing over 8 grams. That seems to be a fairly consistent minimum threshold.
Okay, over 8 grams just to get flowers.
Yeah. And if you're aiming higher, for maximum flower numbers per corm, and especially for that superior chemical quality we talked about, you should be targeting corms in the 10-15 gram range, or maybe even.
Heavier like?
Some sources suggest aiming for over 14 grams for the best flowering potential, and maybe 15 grams or more if you really want to maximize those quality compounds like crocin.
Gotcha. And what about size? The diameter or circumference?
Size is a good first indicator. Aim for diameters greater than 2.5, maybe even 3 centimeters. Or if you're buying based on circumference grades, look for the 10-plus centimeter categories. Size is useful for a quick sort, but if you have the option, confirming the weight is even better.
Now, what about that one source mentioning much smaller corms, like 1 to 2 centimeters for hydroponics? How does that fit in?
Yeah, that was an interesting outlier, wasn't it? It definitely goes against the bulk of the evidence that points towards much larger corms for good flowering.
So why might they suggest that?
Well, it's hard to say for sure without more context. It could be specific to a very particular hydroponic technique we don't have details on, or maybe, just maybe, that specific approach prioritizes vegetative multiplication first, getting lots of small corms to bulk up rather than immediate flowering in the first cycle.
So maybe a different strategy.
Possibly. But based on all the other research focused on getting high flower yield and quality in that initial indoor cycle, relying on those tiny 1 to 2 centimeter corms seems, well, risky. It's something to be aware of that this suggestion exists, but the data supporting larger corms for flowering and quality is much stronger and more consistent.
Okay, good clarification. Beyond the number, size, and weight, what physical things should you be looking for when you actually have the corms in hand?
Right. These are the crucial hands-on quality checks. Number one, firmness. Give them a gentle squeeze. They should feel solid, not mushy, soft, or withered.
Okay, firm. What else?
Inspect them closely for any physical damage, cuts, bruises. Look for any signs of rot, mold, or disease lesions, dark spots, fuzzy growth, anything that looks unhealthy. Also check for pests, though hopefully that's less common from good suppliers.
Uniformity? Does that matter?
Yeah, having a batch of corms that are relatively uniform in size and condition helps ensure they grow and flower more evenly, which makes management easier. And then there's that density thing again. Feel them. Does it feel substantial, heavy for its apparent size? That's a really good qualitative sign.
What about the outer skin?
The dry, papery outer scales or tunic should peel away fairly easily without tearing the underlying tissue. If it's hard to peel or reveals damage underneath, that's a bad sign. And freshness counts. Ideally, you want corms harvested within the last 12 months. Older corms might have lost viability or reserves.
And where you actually get the corms from must be pretty important, too.
Absolutely critical. The sources really emphasize finding reputable, specialized suppliers who know saffron. And this is key. Make sure you're buying corms that were grown specifically for propagation, not corms that have already flowered for several years in a field somewhere and might be depleted or exhausted.
Right, starting with fresh, vigorous material. Any pre-planting steps recommended? Like dipping them in something?
Yeah, drawing from standard practices, a few things are common. First, sorting them again yourself, removing any that look suspect despite your initial selection. Gently removing any really loose, flaky outer scales can be helpful. And yes, a preventative fungicide dip is often recommended, especially for indoor systems where you want to minimize disease introduction.
What kind of fungicide?
Things like carbendazim plus mancozeb mixtures are commonly mentioned in horticultural guides. It's just an extra precaution to reduce the risk of fungal rots starting once they're planted in your nice, warm, moist indoor environment.
Okay, so you've done your homework. You've selected the absolute best corms you can find. Heavy, healthy, the right size. But even the best corm can't do it all alone, right? How do these corms then interact with the actual indoor growing practices?
That's exactly the next piece of the puzzle. You've got the potential in that high quality corm, but you only unlock it if your environment and cultivation techniques are right.
So that planting depth thing we talked about.
Crucial for substrate systems, yes. Remember that interaction. Potentially planting heavier corms a bit deeper, intermediate ones shallower. You need to match the depth to the corm's likely energy reserves. And your growing medium itself, whether it's coco coir, perlite, rockwool, whatever mix you use, it needs to provide good physical support, but also excellent aeration and drainage while still holding adequate moisture and allowing for good nutrient flow.
And then there are the main environmental controls: temperature, humidity, light.
This is where high-quality corms really shine. They can take full advantage of precise environmental control. Temperature is key for saffron's life cycle. Generally, you're looking at temps around 15-20 degrees Celsius for sprouting and initial growth.
That's about 60-68 Fahrenheit.
Right. Then, to trigger flowering, you typically need to drop the temperature often down to around 10-15 Celsius, maybe 50-60 Fahrenheit. Although it's worth noting, some sources mention successful flowering happening at slightly warmer temps in certain indoor systems, maybe up to 21°C or even 26°C sometimes. Depends on the specifics.
And humidity.
Generally, aiming for somewhere in the 40-60% relative humidity range seems like a good balance. High enough for the plants, but low enough to help discourage mold and fungal issues, which can be a risk indoors.
Okay, and light. That's totally controlled indoors.
Yeah. Full spectrum LEDs are pretty much the standard now. You'll typically provide a long photo period, maybe 12 to 16 hours of light per day during the main vegetative growth phase. And the research also points to benefits from specific light wavelengths.
Look it.
Blue light, for instance, seems particularly effective at promoting biomass accumulation, basically helping the plant build itself up, which contributes to both corm development for the future and potentially the development of the floral organs themselves.
So the bottom line is, investing in all that sophisticated environmental control gear doesn't make much sense if you start with weak corms that can't fully respond to it.
Exactly. You're missing a huge opportunity. You need strong corms to leverage those optimized conditions.
And for soilless systems, hydro, aero delivering nutrients through the water, fertigation, that's got to be vital too.
Absolutely. The corm provides that initial energy boost, gets things started, but especially after flowering starts, and certainly for developing those daughter corms, a consistent, balanced supply of essential nutrients delivered through the irrigation water is critical. It sustains growth, supports that high-quality stigma production, and fuels the next generation. You can't rely solely on the initial corm reserves for the whole cycle in these systems.
Thinking longer term then, how does that initial choice of corm really impact the sustainability and economics over multiple seasons in an indoor setup?
It's huge for the long game. First, definitely heed those warnings about avoiding exhausted corms, ones potentially cropped for years already. Always try to source corms specifically grown for propagation, full of vigor.
And the daughter corm production we talked about becomes central.
It's everything for building your own stock and reducing your reliance on buying corms every single cycle, which gets expensive. High-quality mother corms are your engine for producing plenty of good-sized, healthy daughter corms that you can then use for subsequent plantings.
And indoor systems offer an advantage here.
A massive one. Because you control the environment, you have the unique ability to specifically optimize conditions for vegetative growth and daughter corm development after you've harvested the valuable stigmas.
How does that work?
You finish the flowering phase, collect your saffron, but instead of just ending the cycle, you can then tweak the environment, maybe adjust temperature, light, nutrients specifically to encourage the mother corm to put all its remaining energy into bulking up and producing as many high-quality daughter corms as possible before it naturally senesces. You effectively turn your flowering room into a temporary corm nursery.
Interesting. Are there other techniques too?
Yeah, people are even exploring things like corm cutting, carefully dividing larger corms as a way to further accelerate propagation rates within these controlled indoor systems. It's all about leveraging that control.
So an indoor grower could potentially manage an integrated cycle, get the high-value flower harvest, and then immediately pivot to maximizing the production of planting material for the next round.
Precisely. You harvest the gold, then focus on growing your future seeds, so to speak. That kind of integrated thinking, really taking advantage of the environmental control that indoor farming offers, is key to making it work long term.
Okay, so let's try and pull all this together. What's the core message?
I think the message from the research is really loud and clear. Corm size, and especially corm weight, is absolutely foundational for success in indoor saffron cultivation. Weight, because it represents that stored energy, is probably the most direct predictor of performance flowering, yield, even quality.
And you really need those high-quality corms to start with large, heavy, firm, perfectly healthy, and ideally sourced from a supplier focused on propagation material.
Absolutely essential, particularly if you're making the significant investment required for an indoor setup, aiming for those high yields and that premium quality product. Skimping on corms is just false economy.
But as you said, the corm is just the starting point.
Right. A fantastic corm is necessary, but it's not sufficient on its own. You only unlock its full potential with really meticulous indoor management. That means getting things like planting depth right based on the corm, dialing in the environmental controls, temperature shifts, humidity, the right light spectrum and duration, and providing consistent, balanced nutrition, especially if you're growing soillessly. It's the synergy, the combination, that really drives success.
Right. So here's a final thought, something for you, the listener,
Mhm.
to chew on. As an indoor saffron grower, thinking about everything we've discussed, how do you strategically balance that immediate goal, getting the absolute maximum flower and stigma yield from your current cycle, with that equally critical long-term need to produce lots of vigorous, high-quality daughter corms to sustain your operation for future seasons? How can you really leverage the unique, precise control of your indoor environment to optimize both sides of that equation? Thinking about managing that entire corm life cycle within your controlled space, well, that integrated approach might just be the key to truly sustainable, profitable, high-quality indoor saffron farming.